councillors, officers, distinguished visitors, people watching from home. Welcome to this meeting of the Surrey Heath Borough Council Audit and Standards Committee on Thursday, the 14th of April. Is it?
It's also Monday.
Oh. See? I'm behind the times. Monday the 25th. Bank holiday next Monday. Have we any apologies for absence?
We've received no apologies for absence. Everyone's here.
Thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting. I believe everyone's had circulated minutes. Does anyone have any comments?
Chair, could I just make one comment? There's a section on matters arising where it talks about fee scales. I just wanted to just say that the section that says the council has no influence or input into this process, once we submit a scale fee variation to PSAA Limited, PSAA Limited will invariably contact the council section 151 officer to discuss that fee variation before they approve it. So I don't think it's quite correct to say the council has no input into that process.
So that's, if you could guide me to which section that is. Hang on a minute.
7AS, it's the third paragraph down, fourth paragraph down, third paragraph down.
Rodney?
Yeah, so I think it was actually said at the meeting, though, which is what we're actually recording the minutes of. So whilst I'm sure that what's been said there is correct, that is, in fact, the first time I've ever heard that being said, I have to say. So what I would suggest is actually the minute is accurate, but that it may be appropriate to add a note or something like that just to make that point clear. But it's interesting I said that. I'm glad you have, because I've sat on this committee a number of years, and that's the first time I've ever heard it. So.
Okay, so how would we suggest the minutes are amended?
I will just add a note underneath the minutes when we basically do this part in the minutes, just to say it was clarified there.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? No? So with that amendment, do I sign the minutes now?
It's just sign there.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Does anyone have a declaration to make about what we're discussing this evening? Nope. Audit of 2019-20 accounts. Item 4. Bob.
Thank you very much, Chair, members of the committee, people watching. The Council is required to publish its audit statement of accounts. That's a known statement and fact, but these are the audited ones. As yet, the annual accounts for that financial year we're referring to, which ends 31st of March 2020, remain unaudited. There's delays in publishing annual accounts is an issue across the country for many councils, with a large number of local authorities, be it a county, a unitary, and districts, still unable to publish their accounts for 1920. And in some cases, accounts prior to that date are still remained unpublished in audited form. That's no excuse. Surrey Heath is what we're looking at here. But nationally, this has been due to the impact of the marked shortage of resources and recruitment difficulties for all the external audit firms who service local government audits. So this isn't just BDO, it's people like EY, KPMG, and the other big firms that audit local government accounts, as well as other public sector accounts, such as the NHS. This was recognised in a report by Sir Tony Redmond that the government commissioned and has been reviewed by the government and partially implemented by the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, DLUC for short as it's known. This has then been made worse by the COVID pandemic impacting on the ability of the Council's finance teams to prioritise the annual statements over the new burdens that have been put upon us for making support payments to residents and businesses, monitoring the grant funding that's coming in, acting as a payment agency for central government, and completing a myriad of returns to government while still ensuring the probity of public monies around the COVID-19 grant system. Similarly, having to work remotely for safety reasons due to the pandemic has made the usual audit process a lot more time-consuming and acts as a barrier to effective communication and discussion between finance officers and the external audit team. So all these factors have contributed into the delay of getting the 1920 accounts into a position for audit and getting the final audit report on it. The Council first published its draft 1920 accounts in time for the public inspection period that started on the 1st of September 2020. These generated a number of audit questions from our external auditors, and this is not uncommon in the period between moving from draft to final accounts. This is part of the reason why we have external auditors to come in and ask challenging questions around our audited accounts. One key element for the Council's accounts relates to the accounting treatment for the Jersey-based Property Unit Trust, I think colloquially known as JPUT, and now it is presented within the Council's formal statement of accounts, and how it's presented in the Council's formal statement of accounts. Over the past 6 months, Council finance officers have been in close dialogue with the audit team at BDO, and we have now agreed the accounting treatment approach with them, although this is still subject to their full final audit review. The latest draft statement of accounts that were passed to the external auditor for their review was at the end of last week, and a copy of this draft has been posted on the Council's website today with a note explaining the latest draft. And that's the end of my update, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Let Sashi go first. Councillor Mountbagenham.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the update, Bob. Really appreciate your honesty because you're new. So you're stating as you see it, which is a great thing. I have a fundamental problem with what you've just said, because the accounts were published in, as I understand it, around July 2020, and I had written to the council, I remember very clearly, which I have now circulated to the auditor as well. I wrote to the auditor on the 20th of August 2020, raising some serious concern on the balance sheet. And so after you joined, you and I have had a conversation on this, and I see that has been put right now. What concerns me, truly, I find it shocking. This is blindingly obvious that our reserves are wrong. Not by 1 or 2 million, by about 39 million pounds. I'm actually completely at a loss. Since I started this project, not a project, trying to be as helpful as possible to the council, I have been at this council. Look at it, look at it, look at it. In fact, I even wrote to the audit partner, who is present today, I believe it was the 20th of August, because I do have a copy of that email, stating that that balance sheet was incorrect. I had even taken the trouble to go to SIPWA. I had taken the trouble to go to the Institute of Chartered Accountants. Another member of that institute is sitting here. You're not, okay? Not, okay. Wrong institute. Having said that, there are accountants around, and these numbers fundamentally were checked, and they were told, both institutes fundamentally said, that's not, Chartered Accountants said, not my problem. SIPWA said, that's a governance problem, report, which I promptly did. What is shocking is none of the execs, I cannot and will not blame officers here. Absolutely, you folks are officers. None of the execs were informed of this. If they were, they did not take action. Auditor was informed. I will ask the question of the auditor in a minute. After receiving my email, did he inform the council of this error? I do appreciate he cannot adjust the accounts, but at least he's aware of it. Officers were aware of it, and the council never changed, ever. What I'm delighted to note today is a revised account, which is actually published right now, shows what I have been holding, that our reserves, revenue reserves, were wonky by £39 million. It is not a small number. I have given my reasons as to why it was wrong. My people who think we've got surplus income, revenue, usable reserves of 80 million, will find all of a sudden their reserves are down to 40 million. That is still in 2020. Question I have for the auditor and to the exec through you, the officers, do we have enough cash to show that we have got 40 million reserves there? Because that begs the question of accounting going back in time. If you cannot prove the cash, if you cannot prove it in terms of debtors, yes? Because assets have been written down, we all know that. Assets are gone. Even in 2020, it was written down to 40 million, the biggest asset we bought. We're into 21, 22. My question is, do we have cash? One. Secondly, what would that do going forward? As you very well know, I'm addressing you as an officer because none of the execs are here. What is the impact of that in coming years? And you know you have kindly done a very good strategic review of forecast, digging into 7 million. Is that adequate? Is the other question I have. So this is not as simple as just signing off a set of accounts. The impact on this is enormous for this small council. I may come back on some of these points later on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Bates.
Thank you, Chair. I listened very carefully to what Mr Watson had to say. I'm afraid I've heard that report pretty much 3 or 4 times already. I'm going to give you a history of this potted saga because I think it's pretty awful, quite honestly. In April 2020, this started when the 18-19 accounts were completed. They were completed late, and there were some queries at that stage, including, ironically, the JPERT, which again we still seem to be having some issues with. And that was one of the queries from the previous external auditors, which was agreed by them as to the correct process. We then cancelled the July 2020 meeting, and in November 2020, we identified there'd been a delay. The start of what can only be described as a series of lengthy delays. But this delay was because the audit plan had not been distributed in advance of the meeting. In fact, we got it, I believe, I think it may have been the day before, or certainly very, very shortly beforehand. And in the minutes of the meeting, which you can all look at, it identifies receipt, acknowledgement, and actioning of papers from BDO and the council to be a standing item on the agenda of periodic meetings between BDO and the council's finance officers, because we were concerned at that time as an audit committee about this. The January 2021 meeting was cancelled. In April 2021, almost exactly a year ago today, I will quote you what the minutes of the meeting say. It was acknowledged there had been significant delays in completing the audit of the accounts for the 1920 financial year. A number of reasons were given. We just heard them again. Change of various regulatory requirements and COVID, staffing levels, etc., etc. But it identified the audit work that needs to be completed. And it mentioned valuation of non-current assets, allowances for non-collection of receivables, the assessment of non-going concern. And that BDO's position at that stage was that the audit, and I directly quote, was substantially complete, but still requires a number of pieces of information before completion. We made it clear as a committee that that was unacceptable, and that we were assured that it would be completed by later in the summer. June was what we were initially told. And the action that this audit committee agreed was that officers would be instructed to work with BDO to establish all issues which were still outstanding and to develop a timetable to expedite their resolution so that the audit would be completed. So my first question is, what happened to that timetable? Was it enacted? I'd like to see a copy of it now, because I'm fed up of it, and I'm sure other committee members would as well. We were also assured that there'd be a commitment to bring to the meeting in July 2021. You remember that we didn't have a meeting in July 2021. In August 2021, we were advised that the audit was progressing, that all papers had been passed on, all answers to questions arising from the documents would be provided by the end of the week, amendments would be made, that BDO would review and then sign off. We were confirmed by BDO resources would be available. Again, all of this is in the minutes. And if there were no further issues, the final report would be available in September. You will recall, Chair, that the meeting in September was cancelled at the last minute because the report was not ready. So at that stage, a belief was that it would be ready by then, but it was not. And that was decided at the very late notice. I appreciate Mr. Watson wasn't here for any of this. In November 2021, which was our last meeting, which we just talked about in the minutes of, we were informed that this was still ongoing, that in fact we had identified and employed an additional member of staff to focus solely on working with BDO to finalise the audit, and weekly focus meetings would take place going forward. Have those weekly focus meetings taken place? How are they still in place? How much has that cost us as council taxpayers in order to get to the position that we have still 6 months later without having resolved this matter? My question, frankly, as a councillor sat here, is what on earth is going on? Who is to blame for this shambles? Who is responsible? How much longer are we going to have for this? What are the specific queries that are still outstanding? And whilst I have the greatest respect for professional integrity of our finance officers and our external auditors, we need to know what are the list of outstanding queries that are still out there. And I need a proper list, not this vagueness of things which I've heard 3 or 4 times before that I'm fed up of hearing over and over and over again. I appreciate, I'm sorry to Mr. Watson because it's his first time here and it isn't his fault, but we've heard this time and time and time again, and you can appreciate we are fed up to the back teeth of it. So I would like to know whether these meetings are taking place. I would like to know whether this resource is still in place and when are we going to sort this out once and for all.
Thank you. Councillor Whitcroft.
Hello, thank you, Chair. My questions are a little bit more, perhaps a little bit more basic. As anyone who knows me knows, numbers are really not my thing. But I am a little bit concerned. I have a few sort of more basic questions. What I would like to know is how long would you normally expect an audit to take? If you have the end of a financial year in April, how long would you normally expect it to take to get audit figures is my first question. I'd also like to know, please, Mr. Watson went into detail about how we are not the only authority not to have audited our accounts for 2020. And I wonder, please, if you might be able to explain to us what the legal consequences might be of the fact that we have, as a result of the fact that we haven't done that, because obviously it is a legal requirement, and obviously the council is in breach of that. And as I say, I would like to know what the legal consequences of that breach are. I'm also interested in, I appreciate that draft accounts have been published, but I'm also interested, please, in the position in terms of the settings of the ongoing budgets. Because, as I say, I'm really not a numbers person, but even I can figure out that if you don't have a figure to start with, then surely that makes the forward planning much more difficult, because you do not have a nil to start from. So again, I'd like to know the impact, and because the accounts could imply, and it has been implied, that the reserves are out by the best part of £40 million. Now, if that's the case, then that's obviously going to have a significant impact on the budget, which is going to take serious changes to have put right. And again, I'd like to know, please, what the consequences of that are. And then finally, I echo Councillor Bates's request. I would like please, a firm commitment of a date as to when this will be completed. And I would also like assurances that that date, whatever it may be, will be the final time we are asking this question. Because at the end of the day, for our residents in Surrey Heath who are paying council tax on a monthly basis, many of whom who cannot afford that at the moment, to be looking at this council's audit and accounts and seeing what they're seeing is totally unacceptable. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Quite a few questions there. Could we ask Steve Baden from BDO if you could talk to the actual audit, and then we'll go to Bob for the regulatory stuff. Is that okay?
I'll answer, Chair, I'll answer the questions I think I can answer, and obviously happy to take any additional questions on that. In terms of where our audit is up to, in terms of the queries that we have previously raised, most of those I understand have been dealt with. The key thing that we were waiting for is a revised set of financial statements, which, as Director of Finance said, we received last week. So now that we have those revised financial statements, we will audit those amendments and look to conclude our audit. What I can't do at this stage is give you a firm commitment of when that audit will be completed. So we got the revised accounts last week. Over the coming weeks, we will look to complete our audit by testing those amendments to look to ensure that they're the ones that we were expecting to be made. But I can't give you a firm commitment on when that audit will be finished. I think there was a question raised around whether or not weekly meetings have taken place. I think it's fair to say that they haven't been weekly, but they have been regular meetings with both current Director of Finance and his predecessors in that post. On occasions, at some of those meetings, there hasn't been a huge amount to discuss because, as I say, what we have been waiting for is revised financial statements, and it has taken the council some time to prepare those. A couple of the other questions that were raised: how long would you normally expect an audit to take? There's a number of variables within that, depending on the size of the council, the complexity of the council. For a council of Surrey Heath's size, my expectation would be that the audit would take around about 6 weeks, depending on the number of people that you have working on it. But I think it should be possible to complete a final audit in round about 6 weeks for a council of Surrey Heath's size. In terms of the legal consequences of not having the audit completed, in a sense, there are none, really. Though it is a legal requirement to have those accounts signed off, I'm not aware of there being any consequences of a council not having those accounts signed off. Certainly, as we sit here today, I'm not aware of any consequences. I'm happy to try and answer any further questions, but they're the ones that I feel I could answer at this stage.
Thank you. I just have one question. The JPUT was mentioned. It's mentioned in the previous audited accounts, and it is mentioned in this set of draft accounts in that it is intended to bring the JPUT onshore, because what we are talking about is 2019 to 2020. So would the JPUT numbers have affected what you have been looking at?
A lot of the amendments that have been made to the 1920 revised accounts, so the movements between the draft and revised accounts, are to do with the way that the JPUT was consolidated, if you like, for want of a better phrase, within the council's financial statements. So they're the kind of key numbers that we've been querying and raising questions over.
Okay, thank you. Yeah? Councillor Magdalen?
Thank you, Chair. One question I have, specific question I have for the auditor is, like I said, I wrote to the auditor on the 20th of August, 2020, highlighting the errors with the JPUT itself. My question has been, did the auditor inform the council? Because by then the council knew I was raising this point. So did the auditor say, hey, you guys have a problem or potential problem, I know you're not there to rewrite the accounts, to the council to make sure that those changes started taking place then. And so for Mr. Watson to come into play, and 1.5 or 9 months later, for me to have a meeting with Mr. Watson to get this moving. Because if not, we could have been here much faster. But my point here is the significance. The significance of the entries was 39 million, call it 40 million for luck. It's huge, massive for a tiny, tiny council like us. And the execs would have seen this account. The leader would have seen the accounts. I had seen the accounts. Public would have seen the accounts. Yeah. Still, it was left hanging around on our website, which is shocking. So answer to Mr. Bolton is, did you inform the council? It's not your fault if you didn't. I'm not going to hold you to account. But it was widely known within the office as well as the auditors that this error has been there. And it's a significant error.
Bob, could you take that forward? As far as you can, because you weren't here.
Certainly will do. Again, if I go through the list of the questions, I'll add to what Mr. Bladen's added in already. I can't answer the question about whether he told the council, but I'm fairly certain he would have had dialogue with the council's then section 151 or the chief accountant around any errors in there. I'm sure the council would have picked them up anyway. I think in terms of the first question I've got is resource. We had a very temporary resource in to look at the accounting treatment. We now have a longer term resource that's come in, not just to look at the closing the accounts, but has been working very closely with the audit team to get the accounts to where they are today. That resource has been employed and is still employed. I'm currently having to use that resource to cover the chief accountant post because the chief accountant is currently on long-term sick. And as you're probably aware, this is not the sort of post in the council we can cover and have gap for too long. So whereas I'm not very keen on having expensive resource in, I think there's a greater risk to the council of not having that expensive resource in. But again, I'll take the committee's view on that if they wish to say it is the wrong thing to do. In terms of meetings, as Mr. Bladen has said, we have met not on a weekly basis. I wasn't aware there's a weekly requirement, so I apologise for that. But certainly the first thing I instigated when I came in was regular meetings, myself and Mr. Bladen, to see where we are, recognising firstly the issues with the 1920 accounts and then working how we can get the 2021 accounts and the current year accounts that we're closing down now over the line as soon as we can and get us back on track. And again, it's a real issue for us as a council, being able to resource these. It's a real issue, I think, for the auditors, being able to resource them on the reasons I stated earlier. And that's, you know, a fact that the government has recognised. There is a severe problem. And partly that leads on quite nicely to the legal requirement. Yes, there's a legal requirement to publish our accounts. We recognise that. And my first statement was we have to publish audited accounts. There is normally a time frame. The government recognised the impact of the resourcing within the audit side and within councils, partly with the impact of the COVID pandemic and the extra work going on, and they extended the deadlines for most of these accounts, and they still are extending them as we stand. There is a working group, I think, believe in the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, and with SIP for itself, looking at whether we can make the accounting process for local authority accounts simpler, easier and quicker to do. I don't know at what stage that's at, but I'm aware there are discussions around it. Some of the discussions I personally feel would probably be too much and would take away the value of doing the accounts. So I would certainly push back on some of their things, but some of the additional things that we do as a local authority when we do our accounts, and it's worth noting that local authority accounts are not simple. This is the difficulty we have. This is why the SIP for code that tells us how to do it is about that thick, and it changes every year. The difficulty is we have to negate certain impacts of our accounting treatments on the effect of the taxpayer, partly around our pension reserves, unusable reserves in there, partly around our capital reserves and accounts in there, which is why when you talk about the £80 million reserve balance, the council never had an £80 million reserve balance, apart from on the paper in the draft accounts that were put on the website. The correct position, as I stated, and I've done a reconciliation for all members, or stated where we moved to, and as I put in the budget setting papers that we used for the budget setting, is around about that 35, 40 million pounds. It's in there, and in answer to the question about how do we do the budgets, what we have here is a set of financial statements that are compiled under a code that shows we must compile them in the correct way that SITFA want us to. The accounts we use for budget setting is our management accounts, our budget accounts, and we monitor against those budget accounts. We report our outturn against those budgeted accounts. So, as I say, the correct level of balances for reserves, as close as I can estimate them, and believe me, I spent a long time looking at those, for the budget was the balances we used for the 22-23 budget setting and the 4-year medium-term financial strategy. It shows clearly that we have sufficient level of reserves to allow us to draw down that £7 million. You could argue that potentially having that level of reserves, we are doing the right thing by drawing them down to support the budget rather than cutting services to the taxpayer. When faced with a £4 million budget gap on a small budget as we have, you will see at times local authorities will cut. They'll cut services to the public. They'll stop services to the residents. And we just go back to providing statutory services only. We have not done that in our budget setting at Surrey Heath, and that's because we have those reserve balances to allow us to mitigate it over a period. As a 151 officer, I would not advocate using reserves to that magnitude ad infinitum because we'll end up with no reserves. The plan is to bring us to a balanced budget at the end of the 4-year medium-term strategy, and then I plan to start replenishing the reserves to what I class as a sustainable level to allow the council to survive. So that's how we work on the ongoing budgets, that's on reserves. Part of what Councillor Wagganen said about us being a small council means we have a small finance team, as in common with a lot of other district councils. It means that we have to plan our financial year very carefully to use our resources. If you are something like Surrey County Council, you will have a technical accounting team that closes your accounts. That's all they do. We have a team that does a bit of everything, and therefore when we plan our budget year for the finance team and our workloads, we'll spend part of the time closing the accounts, we'll spend part of the time doing the budget setting, and over all those periods, we monitor the budget to put reports into Public Finance and Scrutiny Committee and also into the executive. So what I'm doing now, working very closely with Mr. Bladen, is working out when he can put his resources in, and I then have to match that with the resources I've got available in the council to provide support to the audit and make any corrections that come from it, which means I had to then juggle around our budget setting and our budget monitoring, which is really my way of saying I'm not able to give a firm commitment of a date to to when we can actually have the accounts here. What I will give a firm commitment to is when this report comes to, or statement of accounts in their final form, comes to this committee, it will be in the form that's ready to be signed and has provided behind it a audit report from the external auditors that will state the accounts are unqualified and free from material error. That's the only commitment I can give. I can't give a commitment as to when, but believe me, it is playing very heavily on my mind to make sure we get these accounts done and start on the next set.
Thank you very much, Bob. Councillor Bates.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Some of the questions I raised earlier have been answered, but there are some that are still outstanding. So I'll go through those and see whether we'll get any further with those. The first is an observation that, and I don't think it's just me, I think a number of other colleagues have a similar view, that the problem with this is there has been a historic issue over the past 2 years of things being told to this committee which then don't happen. And that has gone on and on and on and on. And so I'm sorry if we sound rather cynical about this, or certainly I'm sounding cynical, but as I've said, I've heard this before. I appreciate that some people are new, but this has gone on and I've heard the same words over and over again. So yeah, hopefully, Mr. Watson, you know, I think the fourth person who's now dealt with this will move forward, but I'm sure you'll understand we have to take the past with us in regard to this matter. One thing I would say is whenever this matter does get resolved, I think as members, we should be doing our own investigation in terms of the customer element of this, whether we're satisfied that everything has been done, not from a professional standing, because that is, we do have to rightly wait for the audit, but in terms of the delays, the things we have been advised would happen, the fact they haven't happened, who is responsible for that and why. That raises serious issues in my mind about us as a governance of a council. It may be that that involves people who are not here or no longer here, whatever, but this is something that isn't just about resourcing of national audit, it's about a problem of Surrey Heath. And that's something which is our problem and is for us as an audit committee to actually do something about. But I do accept we can only do that at the end of the audit once we know the actual outcome of that. The outstanding kind of more technical queries are this. Can we now as a committee, even if this is done as an exempt email, be advised of what the outstanding queries are? Even if they're technical, I think we now have the right to know what they are as to understand what that is. Now, I understand you may not want to put that in the public domain, but I think we should know where, as of tonight, what are the outstanding issues that they need to be professionally resolved. I think that is reasonable for us as audit committee members to be known. I note that both of you have said that weekly focus meetings have not taken place. It wasn't clear to me why they haven't taken place, because it was very clear from the minutes of the last meeting that I'm reading it, weekly focus meetings would take place going forward. So it's not clear to me why they haven't taken place. I appreciate Mr. Watson say you've only joined more recently and you weren't at last meeting, but nonetheless, the minutes are here, they're clear. Somebody should have told you. It should also have been clear because Steve was at the last meeting, so those meetings should have taken place. It's not clear why they haven't. What meetings have actually taken place since the start of 2022? You both said regular. It wasn't clear to me how regular we're talking about here. And then I guess you have mentioned about the additional member of staff, and I'm sure that all of us would want to join you in wishing that member of staff good health. I'm sorry to hear about their sickness. I wasn't aware of that. And I think that just flags to me that there is a need for us as councillors to have had an update more recently than tonight about matters which have been going on. The last meeting we had was 22nd November, which is 5 months ago. And since then, I don't recall having had any update, unless anyone else has. The chairman may have done, or vice chair. But I think we need to know what's going on here and be regularly updated, because the frustration that some of us have is that we haven't been updated, and then we come along again tonight and we get a further verbal update and a little bit more information, and that is an issue for us. And I do think we should be getting more regular updates, and certainly I don't know if you are having briefings, Chair and Vice Chair, about this, but you should be, and that, again, should be fed into that. So I would strongly encourage that even if there are delays, that we are told of the delays and we are told the reason for those delays and what the outstanding issues are. And if that needs to be done on a monthly basis until the next meeting, then so be it. I'm sorry if that adds a little bit more work, but nonetheless, we are the ones who are publicly accountable for this. We are the ones who are responsible, if you like, for checking the external audit, and it is our responsibility. It isn't just officers or our external auditor. So I hope I have made myself quite clear tonight. I would think I probably have. I think others have too. So I hope those are taken forward and we actually get on with them.
Councillor White.
Thank you. Going back to the legal requirement to publish accounts, I know there's a legal requirement to actually publish the accounts, but what is the requirement to publish actual audited accounts? Because my mind is thinking as a parish council, we have to present our audited accounts. If we don't, then we are subjected to a qualified audit. Is the borough council not under any rules like that if they don't publish their audited accounts?
If you're okay, Councillor Bates, I'll deal with that one first, then come back to yours. We will publish audited accounts that have been audited. The qualification will come around if the auditors are unable to confirm the numbers or the figures or the accounting treatments.
Sorry, I meant, is there not a time limit? Because with parish, there is a time limit.
There is not a time limit that will result in the accounts being qualified. And as Mr. Bladen said earlier, there's no sanction on the council for delaying the accounts. Possibly there should be. You will find there's probably about 195 councils being sanctioned in that situation. One of the councils very close to where I worked before hadn't done its 17-18 accounts at the time I was speaking when I left my council. It wasn't my council, by the way. My council's published those. But the issue is there is no formal sanction on us for it. The damage is potentially, as you say, the concerns of the local residents around our accounting policies and whether we're publishing our accounts. I have said earlier that we do produce outturn reports. The outturn report says what we're going to do we spend our money and what we said we're going to spend it on. That, I would suggest, may be more relevant to members of the community than possibly a formal published statement of accounts, which you'd have to publish, but you have to be able to interpret the formal published accounts. And this is the reason why we do management accounting reports on the outturn that gives a clearer, hopefully more logical explanation of what our budgets were, what we spent, and why we have variances. And that, I think, would be the bit that, if I was a member of the public, would be looking to see whether my local authority was doing what it said it would do, and that's what I do. But again, we have to publish the accounts, but there is no formal sanction on the authority for being late, but ideally we don't want to be late where we can help it. Turning to Councillor Bates' questions, yes, we can provide a list of outstanding queries. What we do hold is an audit log between ourselves and BDO, and in that he gives a list of all the queries. Generally, when I produce a final set of accounts, I will bring in the list of what's changed between the draft accounts and the final account, so you can see what's being changed by ourselves and the auditors. I can have a look at that and make that available. As it stands right now, I believe all the outstanding questions raised by the auditors from the audit prior to the single issue around the JPUT have been resolved. I think Mr. Bladen will confirm, but he may know more than I do because he's close to that part of the audit. So the only thing we have now is the accounting treatment that we've put through on the JPUT to make sure that it agrees with what we've agreed as we're going to do. And then it's just a final review by BDO, and it's not as quick and easy as that happens because any change to the accounts as you can imagine, it's all interlinked, and they need to see everything's being worked through. But certainly happy to provide a monthly update to this committee in writing as to where we are with it, where we're going, and what the outstanding issues are and how fast we're going. It will then help keep us on track as officers, and it will let the committee and members know, as you say, because you are responsible for ensuring we do this. The other one about the weekly meetings, why didn't we have weekly meetings? The issue around it is that it's almost pointless bringing somebody in for a weekly meeting if there's no progress. And there were points during the periods since I've been here where the focus has been on setting the budgets, reporting the quarter 3 out, monitoring position, and we've had quite rightly to be able to say we've not been able to update anything around these accounts. We did have, I mean, I can share, I'll give you a list of the meetings that I've had with Mr. Bladen, but that only lists my meetings at a strategic level. There's meetings between the individual we brought in temporarily, there's meetings between the individual we still got in there, there's meetings between the chief accountant with the audit manager at BDO. If you want me to go through, I can try and interrogate their calendars and see what meetings they've had. But again, it was a case of saying, well, actually, if there's nothing to discuss, why waste our time? Why waste BDO's time?
Yeah, I think I don't need to know a list of exactly who attended which meeting and what date. The key for me is if you're saying to me that there has been, you know, whether it's coming in person or whether it's a Zoom meeting or whatever it may be, I don't really mind. The key is, has there been regular, we said weekly, but has it been on that basis, or how regular has that been? And I still haven't quite got to the bottom of how often it's been. You've said there's been sort of your meetings and some other meetings with some other officers and some other officers. I just kind of, the issue for me is I don't sense there has been any drive on this at all over the last 2 years. Now, maybe that's unfair, but sat here, it doesn't sense that to me, other than maybe recently, and maybe at certain times just before audit committee meetings. Now, I'd say, you know, I'm sorry if that sounds cynical, but that's how it is sat here. So that's kind of, that's the level of detail. I don't need every single interrogation of every single officer. I just need an understanding, actually, that people have been meeting properly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I agree with much which Councillor Bates says. And I think it is important for us to get an understanding of the outstanding issues, because my understanding is that ultimately this committee will need to make a recommendation to the Council on the accounts and the audit. And rather than being faced with the accounts en bloc, I know we have some more, the draft accounts in front of us now, but to be led through and to be given the narrative on the key outstanding issues, I think would be helpful to the majority. I mean, some of us are not high-flying, qualified accountants and what have you. Some of us are more ordinary mortals. But it would be helpful to be led through that process. And one of the areas is obviously this, the missing 40 million, or as some people have addressed it as lost 40 million. That is one of the areas that gets people interested. And I hear what Mr. Watson said, and I don't disagree with what he said, but, you know, that is, I personally would like to get that information drip-fed to us rather than dumped on us a short time before we have to sit and are expected to understand every nut and bolt that's contained in the accounts. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have any comments? Councillor Morley.
Can I recommend that possibly the councillors who are in authority on this, yourself, and I'm surprised that the portfolio holder is not here. Yes. I used to come to these meetings when I was finance portfolio holder. Yeah. I used to meet with the auditors when I was finance portfolio holder. I used to encourage the auditors and the finance department to come to agreement on accounting treatments. It was not my place to say which accounting treatment was correct, but if the accounts aren't going to be audited until you agree, you agree. And I got the people round the table and we got some agreement. It was long, they took too long, it was painful, but we got there. I think somebody needs to take it and drive it through because it's the time that it's taken. And I think that the two gentlemen here who are clearly having difficulties with the fact that it has taken so long, something like this, if it takes too long, then things change. You have to keep going backwards and forwards. And so I think that either yourself, Chairman, or the finance portfolio holder need to get involved. And we need to get these accounts. I was very disappointed to hear that no work has started on the 2021 accounts. I would have thought that that audit would have been running alongside, because surely all the basic stuff of getting all the data out and doing your basic testing, that's not the type of stuff that, I mean, you will have different resources for that. So I don't see why that's not being done. The stuff that's being sorted out at the moment is the much more strategic accounting actual, well, unless the information that's come to the committee is incorrect, that this is more about how you actually technically do the accounting for things, not the basics of the transactions, which I presume you've been doing your transaction testing for 2021. Or maybe not. And actually, I assume the accounts for 2022 are nearly there. So you're about to start on them, please?
I'll just deal with that one very quickly. We will not start 2021 audit until we have satisfactorily concluded our 2019-20 audit, regardless of the fact that there could be transactions that we would test. We have a finite number of resources, and we would not start 2021 audit until 1920 is complete, partly because until that audit is complete, you don't know what your opening position is on things like the balance sheet.
Thank you. Councillor Malmagnum.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to go back to one point which I raised earlier. I have not had a sort of very definitive answer to it, which is my email of 20th of August 2020, highlighting the issue with Jaipur. I wrote to the auditors, and I know the council knew about it. Was there ever a conversation between both parties? Because if there was, these errors could have put right at that point. 1.5 years later, it's been put right. Residents will ask the question of us, where is the missing 40 million? And rightly so. Hence, the problem. So I need a distinct answer as to when it was. Don't have to give it to me now. Councillor Bates has given you a list. You could add that to and write to us. We'll be happy. But again, I agree with one of the statements made here. I would expect the portfolio holder to be here. I don't think I've ever seen a portfolio holder at any of our meetings so far. I've been in the council for 3 years. It is absolutely shocking. Particularly when it comes to audit, I would expect the portfolio holder to be here. Thank you.
Councillor Morley.
Sorry, Chairman, could I just jump in? I mean, has the portfolio holder been invited to come here? If not, I think a message should be sent through that this committee would
Welcome his attendance.
appreciate, I was going to say, would find it beneficial if the portfolio holder was present at these meetings.
I think that's a very sensible outcome. Councillor Bates.
I just wonder whether it may be appropriate as one of the recommendations to be added to the other ones that we talked about, if perhaps we ask the portfolio holder to outline what he has actually done to help move this audit forward. Because we've heard from one of the other, we have two previous finance portfolio holders here who have outlined what they, or certainly Councillor Morley has outlined. So I think it'd be useful for us to understand what has actually happened in regard to any action that's been undertaken by the current portfolio holder. You know, maybe he hasn't been aware, maybe he'd never thought about it, I don't know. But I think he should be at least given the opportunity of outlining it. If he doesn't appear to be on the call, or we could ask him himself.
No, it's never been, as long as I've been here, the financial portfolio holder. And I just assumed they never came, because I wasn't involved in this when Councillor Morley was.
I don't think in my 7 years I ever came to one of these, but we never had this sort of situation.
Mm.
When the situation was starting, I started to come.
Yes.
Mm.
They were running my name. I can sit down. Scrub up for the record.
Absolutely. Yeah, in terms of your comments about people aren't interested in the accounts, this is a stockbroker belt. And there are lots of accountants out there. No, in terms of the general public, they're more interested in something. There are people who are very, very interested in these
Indeed.
accounts.
I wasn't implying they're not interested. I'm saying the more relevant ones to see whether the council has spent what it said it was going to spend is the outturn reports.
Well, maybe, but there are people who take an academic interest. It is way above my pay grade. So, yes, I think be aware of that kind of level of scrutiny. Are we all done on this issue? You asked about whether there were briefings. Yes, there was 2 weeks ago. We were unaware of the at that meeting. Subsequently, they went to Mr. Bladen, and we got them today. So it is kind of hot off the press. I did insist on face-to-face meetings between people because it would be easier to resolve problems. If someone asked a question, they could go off, but that was apparently not possible. A large part due to COVID, but I think people are getting used to working away from home and working remotely. But it would be much better if it went back to the old way of doing things. I agree.
Chair, I think there was 2 points, perhaps just for the recommendation, which I don't think are least controversial, but if they are, then maybe say so. I think the first was that Mr. Watson kindly agreed to circulate the latest kind of areas where there are outstanding queries. So I think as long as we maybe resolve that would happen. There was something else I've written, Councillor. Oh yes, to invite I don't know who this would be, maybe the chair, to contact the portfolio holder to ask if he'd be prepared to outline his involvement in trying to resolve the accounts. Yeah, and he could circulate that to the committee. I think that's probably best done by the chair, though, if you don't mind. I don't think that's probably appropriate for an officer.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure how much this makes a difference to your speaking loudness, but there you go. I hope you all got a copy of the annex to the report, because when I printed it out, it did come out in very small font. So hopefully you can roll with it and go through it with me this evening. So what I've done here is I've brought the annual plan for 2022-23 to this committee. As members know, the plan goes to committee generally at this time of year each year, with a view to outline the upcoming plan for the year ahead, and in terms of breaking down the plan in terms of the actual audits that are going to be planned to be undertaken. With all will in the world, we aim to complete the whole plan. Also, I've brought to committee details of the plan, so that's an estimated number of person days assigned to each plan. Now, we go through the report very quickly. Members will know that the plan's based on a 3-year medium-term audit plan. So every 3 years we have a 3-year plan which is agreed at CMT and at member level. That was agreed, I think, 2 years ago, so we're running in the last year of the 3-year plan. So again, wherever possible, we try and follow the 3-year plan as much as possible. There are exceptions to that where we have been able to complete 1 or 2 critical audits that need to be carried forward into the following year, and that may have a knock-on effect to the 3-year medium plan. But I think the key message for members is wherever possible, my aim is to follow the 3-year medium-term strategy if I can. The next point to bear in mind is the resourcing of the plan. So I've outlined the number of person days required to deliver the plan. So I've given an estimated number of 304 person days to deliver the actual audit. Now we've got about 522 days in total. So when you take into account training, so that's mandatory training as well as CPD training, when you take into account a few days housekeeping, obviously we've got a number of days leave and bank holiday, and I've added a small proportion of time for contingency, for the unexpected, as well as a number of person days to deliver audit consultancy advice. Now, for some unknown reason, that seems to be getting more and more of my time in the last few years, so it's obviously a discussion we can have, but it does seem to be that there are a lot more consultancy and advice type pieces of work that I need to get involved with, and again that could have a knock-on effect with the number of available audit days to deliver the plan. Now the covering report, I've identified how we go about delivering the plan. So obviously our main objective is to achieve as far as possible a wider coverage of council functions each and every year. Now obviously, I don't know how many functions there are, 40, 50 functions across the council. Based on 2 members of staff, that's not really practical to deliver all those audits. So I've based it on a 3 or 4 year rolling plan. Now that 3-year plan again feeds back into the medium-term strategy, but you'll notice on there there might be a few audits that we haven't audited in the last 3 years. Again, that's because the intention would be to deliver them in a rolling 3-year period, but occasionally audits get missed or we are not able to deliver or achieve a particular audit as we would like to within the given resources. If I can highlight 2 brand new audits to members, Chair, tonight. I've included an element for cyber security, which I believe is becoming more and more important, especially for a small organisation like us. All staff undertook a mandatory cyber security training about 3 or 4 months ago, and a key message to come out of that mandatory training was that cyber security, or the risk to organisations, could even be higher for smaller organisations. So less so for the bigger organisations who may have more resources to tackle it. But when you're dealing with a small local authority like ours, quite often the criminal could be targeting our small organisations. That's why I put cyber security on the agenda. The second area is climate change. I believe internal audit haven't given any weight to climate change issues in the last few years. Again, that's going to become more and more important as the years go on. I understand we've got a working group that has been set up in the last year, and my aim and drive would be to make sure that those action points that have been coming out of those climate change working groups are actually being delivered, and I can report back to members to say yes they have been or no they haven't been. So that's a key area for me. Joint waste. Members will know we operate a 4 local authority joint waste programme. Again, for some unknown reason, internal audit at Surrey Heath has been tasked with the annual audit for the joint waste, even though there's 4 partners. My argument in the last couple of years is why can some of the other partners not take on that burden? And finally, we've got round to getting another local authority to take that on. So you'll notice in the annual plan that joint waste has been dropped from the plan. So if you're expecting an update in the summer, we won't be doing one for that. Sections 8 and 9 of the covering report, I've mentioned the number of resourcing. Obviously, the team, as you all know, we need to deliver the whole audit plan with just 2 officers. So we're quite tight, we're quite lean on the amount of resourcing available. And obviously that could put resilience at risk. I was off for a period with a really bad chest infection last year. I was off for a period of time, and my partner was off with my audit. Colleague was off with COVID. So obviously for a period there, we had no audit presence in the council, which isn't ideal, but that's something to bear in mind. I've mentioned there the requirements of internal audit. Certainly, we aim to cover a lot of fundamental audits within the plan, so key finance audits such as main accounting, debtors, treasury, creditors, cash and bank, all those audits where the findings or the key risks that identify in the audit we can carry forward, and we can either discuss those at the corporate risk management group or make sure the action plans are actually being addressed by the managers within the finance system to take forward. So the covering report does talk about monitoring reporting. So obviously my aim leading up the audit team is to make sure that I monitor progress against the plan on a regular basis, and wherever possible to try and bring that plan back into on schedule. As I said, there are some areas outside my control, sometimes health especially, that could impact on the plan, but overall, with all the will in the world, my expectation and my key message to members here tonight is I will strive to deliver as much as the plan within the resources available for the year. Any significant risks or key findings I bring to senior management's attention or CMT's attention, and it's for management to take on the implementation of those action plans. And if I feel that any significant issue isn't being properly addressed, I have obviously the right chair to bring that to your attention if I feel it warrants it. But generally speaking, my presence at CMT and having a discussion at CMT level generally is the sufficient driver to make sure those recommendations are being actioned as much as possible. So I think that's it. I think the main objective of the report is for members to note the report and to approve its contents. But obviously, before we do that, I'm happy to take any observations, challenges, comments that members might have tonight.
Thanks, Alex. It's worth noting that at our last meeting, we suggested some slight changes to the programme, and as you see from this document, Alex has incorporated those. Any comments? I'll take Councillor Hawkins first, then Councillor Bagenham.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks very much, Alex. Yeah, as always, it's comprehensive and it's encouraging that all the columns add up, which is always a good start. 2 members of staff, it's just, you outlined the risks on that when you go ill, partners go ill, and we've all lived through the problems of the last couple of years, and 2 members of staff, and it just seems wrong to my mind that there are only 2 members. Question one, firstly for the chairman, should we be seeking with the chief executive to see if the team, if it's feasible, can be increased? The second one is more for Alex, about how much work, you've heard about joint staff, but do you do with our colleagues across in the Bs and Ds or with county who have a much larger audit and investigations team? Is there some synergy that we could work with here to take the load off you? Because we could all pick at this. Now, corporate enforcement is becoming a very hot potato these days, and it's down as a periodic audit. And there are, as 1, 2, 3 members, 4 members of the pack will know, it's now a running issue with every other month, we're having more and more corporate enforcement issues. So really what I'm trying to get at is, is there a way in which we can add more staff? Is it feasible to do that? And how much work are you doing across with colleagues across the county? Thank you.
That is an issue that I have raised in the past. Alex, would you like to give the same answer you gave to me?
Assuming this is working. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. I suppose there's a few issues there. One is, as members know, I think the general ethos of the internal audit team is to deliver as much as we can within the available resources. Obviously, in years gone by, when I first started at the council, and many councillors know I've been here 21 years now, when I started 21 years ago, we had an head of audit, Derek McManus, we had an audit manager, and we had 3 auditors. So we had a team of 5 in those days. That's not possible anymore. Just logistically, we just haven't got obviously the funds to deliver an audit service with 5 staff. So I suppose we're having to make cuts, just like the rest of the organisation. And I suppose, don't forget, internal audit's a statutory function, so we've got a requirement to deliver an internal audit function. And obviously the council relies on my experience and breadth of experience of working at the council for 21 years, where I could take up an audit now and try and relate to something that happened 10, 15 years ago. You're not going to get that with outside individuals at all, because they haven't got that level of knowledge. So I think for CMT that's a plus. But I suppose my analogy is we're very similar to a lot of other services across the council. You look at licensing, I think they deliver quite a big chunk of work in the year. Again, we're just a team of 2. And certainly there are other smaller teams across the authority. And it is very difficult, because the internal audit function, just like every other activity, had the discussion through Star Chamber in terms of where can we find savings and things like that. And there aren't really many savings in internal audit, because at the end of the day, the only cost of the authority is staffing. Apart from a bit of training, there isn't any other cost. We don't have any license costs, there's no software, because we operate everything in-house. Again, in years gone by, we used to operate an external software package that cost us £3,000. We don't even have that anymore. In an ideal world, I'd like to sit here and say, yes, another 2 staff would be brilliant. But I think I'm quite realistic in that, as an organisation, we are very strapped for cash, especially in terms of resourcing, and any additional resourcing for the internal audit will be at the detriment of another activity across the authority. So that will be my answer to that.
I'm all for extra auditors, as you probably guess. But no, thank you. Councillor Malvagnam.
Thank you, Chair. Alex and I have had many a conversation. I think it's an yearly job about whether he is able to cope, and he's given the same answers every year. And with the limited resources, it seems that you're coping as best as you can. But there are a couple of things which, I've got a few points, but I'm going to take up the entire meeting. This thing on joint, I'm more concerned about the audit when it comes to joint ventures. We got a joint venture with Joint Waste Solutions, and we have recently tied up with Runnymede for building services. We have just, 2 years ago, we tied up with Runnymede again for the community services. By all accounts, the Joint Waste Solutions, I know it's not in public domain, so I cannot speak exactly about the figures, seems to be struggling in terms of funding certain expenditures. Your privileges, you need to have a look at it. And I don't know whether Section 151 officer, are we entitled, can we speak about this? We cannot. So, but my concern is, we tie up with other organizations. From an internal audit point of view, how much early warning can we get with the joint services to say which is going pear-shaped and which is not, because it's paramount. As councillors, we should know. We can't wait till the last minute to find out the council has to do something financially or resource-wise to actually keep this service going for our residents. That's my main concern. So maybe you and Mr. Watson can get together and come up for the next time for this meeting with some sort of a answer to that, if that's feasible. Yeah, and I'd like that noted, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I could just come back on your point, Councillor, and your point, Councillor Hawkins, in terms of joint working as well. So community services, I've just recently finished an audit of community services. So that's basically a review of the partnership working arrangements between Surrey Heath and Runnymede. As you know, we deliver our Meals on Wheels and our community transport, dial-a-ride, all of those services are now in partnership with Runnymede Council. And I've just done an audit where I've reviewed the processes and the policies and how staff are complying with the partnership agreement, both with the staff at Surrey Heath as well as the staff over at Runnymede. So there's an example of how the internal audit team here at Surrey Heath are actually doing a cross-cutting between more than one organisation to make sure that the key audit principles and the key governance arrangements, as I would expect them to find them within the Community Services Partnership Agreement, are actually in place and are being followed. So I covered a plethora of areas, including risk management, staffing, TUPE. So when the Community Services Partnership was in the process of being identified as a formal protocol, we obviously TUPE'd staff across from Surrey Heath to Runnymede. I looked at that area. There are a number of financial matters that was pointed out to the executive report in terms of the implementation of the new scheme. And I've been working with the Community Services Partnership Manager, Darren Williams. You may have heard of Darren Williams. Over at Runnymede to make sure that as far as possible they're addressing all my key areas and concerns. So that's one area. Obviously joint waste. We've done an annual joint waste audit over the last few years, and we've obviously provided a different level of assurance. So we've actually issued limited assurance reports for joint waste scheme in the past, as well as a substantial assurance report. So we different levels of audit that have been achieved over the last 3 or 4 years. And again, those findings actually go to the Joint Waste Partnership Board. So the committee that is sat by different by different authority members, as well as Surrey Heath senior officers, my audit report actually goes to that board on an annual basis. So they actually get to see the findings of the work of the internal audit team. Another area is, this is still quite new at the moment, but internal audit every 5 years, Chair, is required to undergo what's called a peer review, whereby we pitch our level of service delivery, our quality management system, in another word, with other local authorities. Now, there's 2 ways you can do that. One, you can pay for an external company to provide that service and come in and review the work of internal audit, just like what's happened to building control. An external quality assurance company have come in and reviewed their work. Or what we've done in the past is we've teamed up with 2 other local authorities and done a triangular self-analysis, in so many words, between ourselves, Spelthorne and Elmbridge Council, with a view to identifying best practice and areas of improvement that those 3 local authorities we can actually learn from in terms of how they're delivering things with short resource, tight resources. And again, that's scheduled to take place later on this year as well. So I'll be interested to see what the main findings come out of that, because that will give us a good steer as to say, actually, how well is Surrey Heath doing against our neighbouring authorities in terms of delivering a successful internal audit service.
Thanks, Alex. Just before I call in Councillor Bates, I would like to say that and you, I looked just now, but you weren't waving. we have an excellent audit facility in this council. We have a highly professional, small team, but of very experienced people who are benchmarking themselves and doing all the right things. And I think they are to be commended, and I'd like that written down, please. Sorry, Councillor White.
It was just quick. You said you were working, just finished the audit for the joint partnership working with Runnymede. Do they share that cost for that audit, or do they do their own audit as well, which seems a waste of time? So do they share the cost of your time?
I did ask that very question to the finance team to find out whether we could actually recharge an element of my time last year. And the response I got was the internal audit work is absorbed within the overheads that are built into the contract. So there are obviously there are a number of budget lines on the budget page. A number of those will be overheads, so like management costs, HR costs, legal costs, you know, most of those back office functions that are quite vital to the continuation of the service. And I guess the internal audit you know, what we do is no different. We're providing a service to both authorities, but without actually specifying my exact time. It's very difficult to bill a neighbouring authority for my time for that, but those costs will be absorbed within the overhead. So there is an element built into the contract for not necessarily direct recharging, but there's an acknowledgement that there's going to be a certain element of HR costs, legal costs, internal audit costs, and those are built into the programme.
Does that answer your question? Thanks. Councillor Bates.
Thank you. And firstly, I do agree with what you just said about the audit team. I think that is very true, and certainly I echo those thoughts too. My comment was also about contracts, because I see that the plan for this year is that we would look at procurement, including contracts, and we've estimated 15 days for that. And I guess my question is that sufficient? Because I think contracts is quite a serious issue, and has been a serious issue for us. So ones I can talk about are the High Street, where there's a member working group that is specifically going to be looking at that. There are other areas that I can't go into, but where we need to reassure ourselves regarding things like penalty clauses, regarding things like contract variations that are suddenly agreed, these sorts of things. So I think I just am not sure 15 days, no matter how good an audit team are, is going to be sufficient to necessarily cover those elements of work. So I guess, you know, you would know more than me how much time it would take, but I'm just not sure necessarily 15 days is enough. Whether you would use some of the contingency for that, I don't know. But that may be an area when you begin looking at that, maybe slightly more than 15 days. The other area I just wanted to touch on was this issue of value for money for the audit team. And I go back to my days when I was a council officer, and I must admit, when I heard, oh, audit are going to come around and do your service, which in my department was kind of housing and community, it wasn't necessarily the greatest welcome that was ever given to them. It's not, no, they're very professional, but it was kind of a feeling of, oh goodness, they're going to look at things and find things wrong. Now that is obviously a negative view, but nonetheless it's a view that was shared, I think, amongst some colleagues. But in reality, of course, audit are there to save us money, because if they do find things that we are not doing as we should be doing, and you know, we may have had some examples of that, we in reality are going to save money if audit find it as opposed to somebody else. And I just wonder if it's at some point, perhaps over the course of this year, whether we can try and put some kind of value to that. I don't know if it's possible or feasible, but it just strikes me as something that would be useful for us to do, because it might well be actually that it's cost effective to have a third auditor for those reasons. I don't know. We'd have to see a business case on that. But I think that certainly it is true that audits save us money. And we just need to recognise that and not just think it's red tape and everything.
I 100% agree. And we have discussed this issue. Would you like to?
If I could just come back, Councillor Bates, on the contracts question. So just a couple of points on that. I guess on first view, I totally agree. Obviously, there is an element of finger in the sky in terms of the number of audit days that are required for each. Obviously, it's driven by risk with a number of factors. That could include staff turnover, the number of transactions, how important that service is to the authority, so on and so forth. But I suppose one thing with contracts is, don't forget, there will be a number of audits that we're going to cover this year that would also require me to look at the contract element within those particular audits. So if I give you an example, leisure centres. So obviously we're quite new with the new leisure centre operating on the A30, and even though I've not started the audit yet, I would have thought, and you know, off the top of my head, one of the key areas for my testing within the leisure centres audit will be to see how that contract is going between the council and the third party. So are we getting value for money? Are they delivering what we expect them to deliver? Are they complying with health and safety? You know, in terms of resourcing, are they giving the council the correct amount of management information for us to make key decisions and make sure we can get the contract back on track if we need to? So that's an example whereby I would expect my input to be driven through the leisure centres audit about a new HR/payroll computer system. Trent, I'm not sure if your allowances go through that, possibly may well do. But again, as part of the annual payroll audit, not only do I look at making sure starters and leavers are paid correctly, there's amendments to pay correct, overtime, timesheet to staff, all those traditional things I would expect to look at as part of the audit. But also, equally, I look to see how the council is managing its contract with the HR service provider, because we need to make sure who holds the data. Is the data owned and held by the third party, or is it owned by the council? How is that being adequately protected? In, you know, how is the council's rights being protected in that? So those are the sorts of areas I would expect to be asking them in terms of how they're delivering a payroll service in conjunction with the third party. And we have to pay annual licensing costs for that. So I'll be making sure that are we getting value for money, or are we actually paying the costs as we expect it to? Is there an element within the annual licensing plan for generating new areas or tailoring the payroll system to make sure it's fit for purpose? Because every year we need to make sure that system is getting better and is better meeting the needs of the council. Are we paying for those additional services, or is that included in the annual contract fee? So those are the sorts of areas, but equally, you're quite right, maybe 15 days is enough, but it could well be that by the end of the audit, we will have invested 20, 22, 23 days, in which case, obviously, something else will have to slightly give to take that into account. But obviously, we've got a slight contingency as well. I think, looking at my small figures here, we've got a maximum element of 50 days to take into account slight overruns if we feel that particular audit is necessary to the council.
Did you not have some examples of cash saved?
Or cash savings?
Yeah.
I think about 10 years ago, I think possibly members gave us a very similar question. They asked us, could we quantify our audit recommendations to say, actually, how much could this save the council? And some audit recommendations, I guess, are easier to quantify than others. Some of them are very intangible, because if we hadn't recommended something, it could stop something going wrong. But if it did go wrong, it's very difficult to actually articulate and put a figure on what that something could go wrong is for the council. Because, for example, it could be reputational risk. So if we didn't do something, that could cause the council reputational harm. But how do you quantify that reputational damage to the authority? It could have saved the council a heck of a lot of work in mitigating social media and trying to defend what we did and, you know, digging ourselves out of the hole. But how do you quantify that? Because if you stopped it happening in the first place and it didn't actually materialise, then you don't know what the actual cost is to the authority. So I would say there are, at the end of the day, there will always be some audit recommendations that we can readily quantify. Maybe those are the ones that we could focus upon. But there are equally going to be a number of recommendations that we're preventing something from going wrong. And it actually is quite difficult to put a figure against those, really. So,
Yeah. If an audit system is working properly, nothing ever goes wrong, nothing ever happens.
no, but that's why we're here,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
things do come across.
Thank you, Alex, for the microphone.
Sorry, they need to approve the plan.
This plan, we're all happy with this?
Support your comments about our professional team.
Good, thank you. So, date of next meeting? 25th of July.
Right, so
Well-
who's the first question to ask? Will we have the accounts at that stage?
We had a briefing 2 weeks ago, and they were promised for the end of June 2022. But then, I hate to say this, but we were promised that they'd be ready by the end of June 2021. So, and Mr. Bladen has said that he cannot guarantee anything. So, shall we keep in Monday the 25th of July at 7 p.m.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yes. Because you have all the information now, and we'll keep our fingers crossed. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. And thanks, Alex. Thanks, Bob. And thanks.